Welcome back, and make yourself comfortable. Let your shoulders sink a little and your breath slow down. Tonight, imagine a quiet earth where the moon has stepped aside, and realize, almost like a whisper, that you might not last a day without it because of the way tides silently spread and the way the planet's axis, ever so patient, would grow tired without that steady companion. How sleepy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? If this soft kind of science helps you drift off, a gentle like and a quick subscribe go a long way. And you can always use the playlist link in the description to keep learning as you drift deeper, letting one calm episode lead you through the night without needing to open your eyes again. Imagine yourself on a smooth shore at night, where the air smells faintly of salt and cool minerals. The sand is cool under your feet, and the waterline slides forward and back with a patience that requires no announcement. There is a silver path painted across the ripples, a ribbon of light that looks like someone carefully brushed the sea with soft mercury. Your breathing matches the water without effort, in and out, the same gentle rhythm that repeats and repeats. There are no sudden edges here, only the roundness of a planet turning and the careful tug of a neighbor in the sky. The moon is not loud. It does not shout. Its influence is a soft gradient, a difference across the earth that lifts and lowers the ocean by the width of a hand or the height of a small building, depending on where you stand. What matters for sleep and for science is how that lift happens, quietly, steadily, each water molecule feeling a slightly different pull, so slight that you can imagine it as a set of threads, almost like a delicate embroidery, drawing the ocean into two subtle bulges that move as the world turns. One bulge faces the moon, one looks away, and between them the seas relax, like a blanket laid over a sleeping body, rising here and sinking there with the hush of long practice. As you listen to that idea, listen also to your breath. There is an even pace to both. The ocean sways in a big, slow measure, and night creatures have learned its timings the way you learned your steps on a familiar path in the dark. Sandpipers measure the beach with quick feet and still seem unhurried. Seagrasses sway with so little effort they hardly seem alive, and yet they answer the tide with a devotion you can feel if you stand quietly enough, somewhere in your imagination. Now picture how those tides would be different if the moon weren't there to lead them. The sun would still pull, so gently for such a massive being. Solar tides exist, smaller and steadier, like a second metronome in a room where one already guides the orchestra. Today, the two play together, sometimes strengthening each other in spring tides, sometimes softening in neap tides, and the result is the familiar rhythm along harbours, deltas, and quiet coves. Without the moon's careful voice, the music would lose much of its rise and fall. The hush would become even more hushed. Some inlets would barely notice the difference between high and low water. Some places that now reveal generous mudflats would hardly lift their skirts at all. The ocean's stirring spoon would slow down. the stirring matters in simple, sleepy ways. The sea is not a still bowl. It has layers, like a bed with sheets and blankets at different temperatures. The tides reach down and shake those layers, not violently, but persistently, mixing cool with warm, shallow with deep, and carrying tiny life and tiny nutrients in slow spirals. You can imagine glittering particles under moonlight, rising and sinking in columns, guided by small, almost invisible waves that begin where tides brush sloping seafloors and underwater ridges. These internal waves roll across basins in deep silence, moving the stories of plankton and oxygen and dissolving minerals. The moon feeds that motion in a quiet way that never needs an announcement. Its energy joins with the Earth's rotation, and the mixture becomes a long lullaby for the water world, balancing temperatures, easing extremes, and setting the stage for the daily pages of marine life. Near shore, in the intertidal zone where you might leave soft footprints, the moon writes a calendar in wet and dry, in light and shadow. Barnacles fix themselves at just the right height, where they can close up and wait out the dry spells, then open to feed when the sea returns. Mussels hold fast in bands like tidy neighbourhoods, with their own carefully chosen addresses, each address a compromise between drowning and drying. Crabs learn the daily departure of the sea like a bus schedule that never fails them. The gentle rhythm continues again and again, as if the coast were breathing. You can feel how this rewrites time. There is the short rhythm of a day, the middle rhythm of the fortnight, the longer rhythm of the month. Fisherfolk know, through grandmothers and quiet notebooks, that certain bays fill quickly when the lines of sun and moon align, and they learn to read the neat patterns that are really geometries, angles in the sky, making heights at the shore. These are not dramatic secrets. They are comfortable secrets, soft ones, that make life predictable in a world where the wind can change its mind. The moon gives routine to the sea, and that routine becomes a pillow under the lives of those who live by it. Farther offshore, the energy of tides flows around seamounts and the edges of continents, turning friction into heat, yes, but mostly into mixing. That mixing carries oxygen from the surface down the gentle staircase of the ocean, and it brings nutrients from the dark to the light. Small drifting plants find what they need and lift it into living tissue, and tiny animals follow, and bigger ones follow them, in cycles that are unhurried and enormous. The economy of the ocean, in which sunlight becomes food and food becomes movement, receives a quiet subsidy from the moon. It is not necessary to list exact numbers in your drowsy state, only to sense that the energy is large enough to matter and soft enough to be forgettable, like the sound of a fan in another room. There is also a tide in the ground beneath you. Rocks that seem hard breathe a little, because the earth itself, though solid, deforms under the same gentle differences that lift the sea. The crust swells by the width of a finger here and a hand there, too slow for you to feel. Wells notice groundwater levels quiver. The planet flexes, then relaxes. And it does this every day, every month, like a giant cat needing a cushion with patience. No alarms, only small adjustments. The moon is good at those. Consider the axis of the Earth, that friendly imaginary line running through the North Pole down to the south. It is tilted, a tender leaning that gives us seasons, a lean of about 1/4 of a right angle, more or less. The lean is not fixed. It sways within limits, and the direction of the lean traces a slow circle over thousands of years. If you could watch it from far away with endless patience, you would see it describe elegant loops, like the tip of a slow-moving pen. The moon steadies this motion. It holds the axis in the gentlest way, preventing wild swings that would turn the planet's weather into a series of sharp, unpredictable moods. When people speak of the moon stabilizing the Earth's obliquity, they mean that this lean does not flail. It drifts. It hums lightly, and that humming makes ice ages and summers and tropical rains follow patterns your ancestors learned slowly over long, calm evenings. Imagine if the moon were not there to lend this steadiness. Over very long seasons in the planet's story, the axis could wander further, as if the top you spun began to wobble without a teacher's guiding hand. The northern hemisphere might tilt deeper toward the sun for a while, and then away, with ancient continents warming strongly, then cooling, slow enough that forests and deserts would migrate, but not playful enough for easy travelling. The change would not grab headlines the way sudden events do. It would be more like a change in the timbre of a background note. Yet life that depends on regularity listens to that note. It is a comfort to know the note is held steady by the moon's quiet gravity. There is also the length of day. The moon, drawn by the Earth's raised tides, lags behind them as the planet turns, and this lag pulls. The pull translates into a slow giving of energy from the Earth's spin to the moon's orbit. The day lengthens by small fractions. The moon drifts a little farther away, and the cycle continues with a calm that matches your resting heartbeat. Fossil corals record old rhythms like ancient metronomes. Their growth lines suggest that long ago, more days fit into a single year, each day shorter than today, and the arithmetic of that change is simple and soothing. It happens bit by bit, almost as if the planet were taking a deeper breath every century. The moon plays the role of gentle teacher, encouraging the Earth to take its time. Without this exchange, the Earth's rotation would evolve differently. The difference is not an emergency, just a change in tempo. But over millions and millions of nights, tempo matters. Planetary winds would adjust. Currents would recalculate their paths. Creatures that dance to the length of night would learn new choreography. With the moon in place, all of those quiet instructors know the steps. You and I are beneficiaries of that calm, unnoticed training every time the evening cools in the way we recognize. Night itself, the visual part, is a script the moon helps write. Even when it is thin, the moon adds a layer of silver to the edges of things. Leaves shine softly. Snow, where there is snow, grows a pale memory of day. Roads seen from hills seem to glow faintly, like polite trails left for late wanderers. In ancient camps and small villages, the moon's phases told a kind of time that did not need words. People could sew by it, or fish by it, or tell stories by it, and the stories would take on the reliable shape of the returning crescent and the fading full. You can feel, as you lie back and relax, that this cycle is generous and forgiving. It goes away and comes back, and it asks nothing more of us than attention. The moon's light is gentle enough to protect sleep. It sets the stage without waking the actors. Certain birds choose migration nights by it. Certain corals notice its precise height and spill their gametes into water all at once, turning the sea into a diffuse cloud of beginnings under a lamp that does not glare. Sandworms in some estuaries time their emergence to exact lunar nights, because the water's movements and the soft light align like clocks set by a conscientious caretaker. The moon makes appointments that keep themselves. It is soothing to know that in the time it takes for your breath to slow and your muscles to soften, these appointments are being kept somewhere beyond your window. You can also sense how the moon affects the atmosphere. There are tides in the air too, not just in the water. They are small and molecular. A little rise and a little fall in pressure and wind that your skin cannot feel by itself. Yet barometers can trace them in the high layers, where a quiet hum of waves and oscillations is always present. The lunar pull is one more pattern among many, subtle and continuous. The weather you feel in a given afternoon is not steered by this gentle pattern, but the background rhythm exists all the same, like an instrument in an orchestra playing a note you can only hear when the hall is empty. The gentle rhythm continues, upward as well as outward, slowly, softly. Walk back with your mind to the coast again. See a harbour you like, one with wooden pilings and maybe a lighthouse painted white. At low tide, the mud is glossy and smooth, with little crossings of gull prints and the quiet bubbling of air from tiny burrows. At high tide, the same place is a mirror, boats rocking, ropes creaking so faintly you might think you dreamed it. The change from low to high is slow enough to ignore and persistent enough to shape everything. Cities on coasts learn the angle of their steps and the height of their docks by watching this change. Children playing in rock pools learn a sense of time from it without realizing they are learning anything at all. That is the special kindness of the moon. It teaches with presence, not with announcements. Now, gently imagine a world the same as ours, but with the moon gone, not exploded, not dramatic, just absent, like a chair quietly removed from the corner of a room. Nights remain, of course. The sun still sets. The stars would seem more numerous without the scattered glow of moonlight. The Milky Way would be a lace ribbon across the night for more of the month. In a city, the difference might be small, with streetlights and windows filling the role of moons. But in wide, dark places, the nocturnal stage would look different. Owls would listen even harder. Night deer would move with more caution. Fish that come close to the surface would adjust their habits because the shadow they cast would change, and the silhouettes that risk attracting larger mouths would not be the same. It is not a catastrophe in a single evening, only a remapping of the delicate comfort that a familiar lantern provides. Down at the shore, the gap would be felt in the measure of the tide. The sun's tide would still lift the water a little and set it back down, so softly that you could describe the motion as a polite nod. But many bays would lose their daily drama. Salt marsh grasses would drink less often. Flats where wading birds probe the sediment might stay underwater longer, or stay dry when they expect refreshment. The curves of estuaries, carved by centuries of currents and slacks, would find themselves guided by a quieter hand. Sediment would settle differently. Oxygen would have a slower path downward. The stirring spoon would be set to a lower speed. In the open ocean, the internal tides would weaken. Those great, invisible waves that roll along the edge of density layers would still exist, fed by the sun and by winds pushing at the surface, but their paths would be less energetic, and fewer slopes would coax them into their long travels. Deep swimmers would feel a different kind of stillness. The redistribution of heat across basins would change, a small change in the moment, and a significant one over centuries. And over those centuries, ice finds the edges of its patience. If you think of ice as a slow animal, it grows or retreats depending on that distribution. Snow lines shift a little on mountain ranges. Rivers alter their calendars. All of this is slow enough to put you to sleep. And that is not an insult to the beauty of it. You are allowed to drift as you listen, because the planet does not hurry on this subject. Back in the rocky mantle, the breathing of the earth would quiet as well. The rise and fall would not stop, because the sun is still a partner in gravity's duet, but the amplitude would be less and the timing simpler. Springs that respond to tiny changes in pressure would find a different rhythm. Instruments measuring the smallest movements of the ground would draw narrower loops in their records, the pencil barely lifting. People who delight in that delicacy would still find it beautiful, but it would be a quieter beauty. Even the faint corrections that satellites make as they circle would be new, because without the moon, the fine shaping of Earth's gravitational field adjusts, like a blanket smoothed at the edges. The axis, without the moon's hand at its back, would begin a more wandering course. Not all at once, not with a jolt, but with the kind of change you might notice if you checked a clock once every 1,000 years. Over millions of years, the tilt would drift more widely, sometimes settling into ranges that are gentle, and sometimes stretching into angles that are bold. The seasons would answer, not with panic, but with different pages. Rain belts would walk north and south, and trees would follow. Creatures would migrate in their own slow ways. Humans, ever quick, would name the shifts, study them, and adapt. That is what we do, even when the teacher is the quiet rearrangement of sunlight across latitudes. But the moon keeps the tilt in familiar confines, and we live in those confines as if they were a cradle shaped exactly for us. The moon has also become part of our memory. Months carry its name in many languages, and even where calendars march to industrial beats, people still look up to mark the moment when the circle is full, or when the thin crescent returns like a careful smile. Artists have painted it as a coin on velvet, as a bowl, as a watchful face. Lovers and farmers have made use of its light in different ways, but often with the same softness. In cities, it rises between buildings like an old friend who still remembers the village. In deserts, it lays a silver dust over dunes that were copper only hours ago. In forests, it turns leaves into a million tiny mirrors. You can rest inside the idea that such a companion exists, even if you do not always greet it. Imagine, in this drowsy moment, the mechanics of the tide more precisely, the better to fall asleep. The moon's pull is a difference, not a single yank. The side of Earth that faces the moon is drawn a little more, and the far side a little less, relative to the center. That difference stretches the planet into an ellipsoid, a word that is soft when you speak it slowly. The water answers readily because it is free to move, but the crust answers too, in its slower way. As the Earth rotates, that shape is dragged along, and friction at the ocean floor resists the slip. The resistance heats the water, but not much. The real result is a torque, a turning force that takes spin from the planet and gives the moon a little extra speed in its slow path around us. That extra speed moves the moon outward, as if it were climbing an invisible hill at a pace you can barely imagine. Tonight, in your bed, that climb continues, centimetre by centimetre each year, a movement you could never notice, and yet one that matters over the length of the story. On a planet without a moon, this exchange is smaller. The sun still pulls a little and stirs the seas, but the knob on the planet's spin-down dial is set lower. Over epochs, that means a different length of day than the one our fossils record. Wind patterns that depend on day length and temperature cycles would adjust their keys, perhaps like a familiar song played one step down. Still lovely, still itself, but slightly altered. The gentle rhythm continues, even in that alternate script. But here, in this actual world, the moon keeps time as if it were resting one hand on our shoulder, a reassuring weight reminding us of a schedule we have come to trust. In small bodies and habits, the moon has left its tracing. Our sleep and wake cycles answer mostly to the sun, but the moon's light and its predictable absence have played a background role in how we journey through the night for tens of thousands of years. Night hunting, night gatherings, night prayers, night travel by sea, all have had an ally in the moon. In the modern age, electric light has taken over many duties, but our inner storytelling still keeps the moon on its guest list. Some people sleep less soundly on very bright full moon nights, and some do not notice at all. All of these variations are fine. What matters for our quiet exploration is that the moon is a familiar presence your mind has learned to expect, a calm across the dark that contains no demand. Linger for a while with the shoreline. Picture a tidal flat, scattered with the low domes of snail shells and the small, soft plants that hold mud in the gentlest of hands. At the highest reaches of the tide, salt-tolerant bushes find their footing, and tiny crabs dig homes with delicate kicks. When the moon is fat and closely aligned with the sun, the water reaches them more often, delivering nutrients in gentle floods. When the moon is at a right angle, the range is modest, a quiet middle ground that lets certain seeds germinate without being washed away. Over seasons, these differences shape the edges of continents into lacework. They turn bays into nurseries and reefs into marketplaces of larvae and light. There is an art to the patience the moon teaches these places. The art looks like resilience from a distance, but up close, it looks like recession and return. The way your breath leaves and arrives. No hurry, no fear, no need for announcement. Try to feel with your imagination how spring and neap tides create their pattern. When the moon and sun line up, their tugs add, and the sea's rhythm swells. Not a drum solo, just a fuller pulse. A fortnight later, when they are at right angles, their tugs subtract, and the tide is modest, like a conversation in a library. This interplay keeps coasts from falling into monotony. It prevents the sea from being too predictable for too long. That mild variety gives living things room to keep their surprises. Without the moon, the variety would narrow. The sea would not become still. It would just choose fewer notes to repeat. The broader climate hears the moon too, although in the quietest of ways, because the moon helps steady the tilt. The planet's stored ice at the poles, and the band of storm tracks that circle the ocean basins find themselves working within comfortable spread. They do change, they do wander, but they do so with boundaries. Remove the boundaries, and the wandering is larger. The consequences are not the explosions of fiction, but the long comfort of predictability would thin. People who plant and harvest outside the tropics know how much they love the size of the growing season and the reliability of the frosts. Animals counting on snow cover to hide or to find food know the odds of their habits. Even if those odds stretch and shrink over centuries because of other influences. The moon is a hand on the tiller that prevents the most dramatic lurches. Feeling that steadiness is like falling asleep on a train that moves smoothly and never clatters. The moon, in its shyness, also touches the shapes of coastlines in ways that only become visible when you look through time. The tidal range and the power of currents at inlets decide whether a sandy spit grows or erodes, whether a barrier island migrates, whether a delta builds outward or retreats. Each grain that tumbles along the bottom is part of a long, dance led by the moon. The dance does not demand attention. It just continues. Humans building harbours and walls join the choreography without always knowing who wrote the score. Lighthouses watch it all like patient grandparents. You can also picture the Pacific, where great gyres sweep with the winds, and internal tides travel thousands of kilometres from their sources. These internal tides, soft as ghosts, eventually find continental slopes and release their energy, lifting cold water toward the light, giving oxygen a chance to burrow deeper into old layers. The moon's quiet energy, captured at shallow sills and underwater mountain ranges, spreads as a network of ripples through the interior of the sea, like heat moving through a teapot. Without the moon, fewer of these ripples would step out into the basins. The deep would be a little more still, a little more stratified, and changes at the surface would take longer to express themselves at depth. The world would not end. It would simply be less stirred, like soup left to settle on the stove. The gentle rhythm continues, just with a smaller amplitude. In the crust, the daily flexing loosens tiny grains along faults and tightens others. Scientists watch for patterns, careful not to overpromise, because the quiet influence of tides is only one of many in that underground world. Most days, it is background, a reminder that even stone is not perfectly rigid. The moon adds a beat to the march of stress, and sometimes that beat aligns with other motions. But for sleep, it is enough to know that the ground is not frozen in its shape. It breathes, and because it does, underground water moves in and out of pores a little more easily, and even that tiny movement supports ecosystems in caves and aquifers. Quiet help, delivered without fanfare, defines the moon's style. For humans, the moon has long been a navigational friend. Before the grid of satellites knit the sky into a map you could carry in your pocket, navigators watched the moon to tell time and to fix their longitude. They read lunar distances from stars, a technique requiring patience and clear nights. The moon, reliable in its phase and motion, enabled ships to cross open oceans with more confidence than the stars alone offered. In that world, the moon meant safety and return. Even today, when you tuck yourself into bed with the weather forecast the next morning already folded in your mind, you live in a system that once depended on the moon to travel between continents, to deliver letters, to reunite families. Sleep comes easier when you recognize the long chain of guidance that brought you to this ordinary night. There are rhythms in us that syllable our days in more than just hours. Some people feel subtle monthly ebbs and surges in mood or energy, and some do not. Plants exposed to the moon's light in the laboratory shift their chemistry by tiny degrees. Marine animals schedule their reproduction, their migrations, their metamorphoses by the moon. Even if you personally do not discuss your life with it, it is a neighbor worth acknowledging when you close your eyes. It has stood outside your window across the seasons and across the years. It watched your childhood storms and your quietest dawns. It has not intruded or complained. The moon is the friend who sits quietly on the couch while you read, content to be near, content to lend a backdrop that needs no thanks. If it left, the loss would be most felt in the hidden parts of systems. Coasts would adjust their maps on their own time. Fish would choose new depths for feeding. Birds would choose other nights. And the axis would begin its long wandering through angles and attitudes you and I could not catalogue in a single lifetime. But the immediate change in a single day would be mostly this: darker nights, quieter tides, and the knowledge that one familiar piece of the sky no longer showed up to its usual appointment. Even that is enough to understand why the phrase, "You would not last a day without the moon," can be said with a smile of recognition rather than a frown. We last our days now with the moon, and in doing so, we have shaped homes and habits that fit it like a well-made shoe fits the foot. The gentle rhythm continues, suited to what we have become. Still awake, comment the secret word, nebula. Beyond coasts, in the slow ballet of the whole planet, the moon's effect on precession is another thread in the tapestry of calm. Precession is the gentle wobble of the top that is Earth, a loop that takes many millennia to draw. The moon increases the rate of that wobble, and by doing so, shifts how the sun's energy is distributed seasonally over very long timescales. Our planet's climate listens to that not with its weather ear, which hears thunderstorms and cold fronts, but with its climate ear, which hears the advance and retreat of ice sheets and the negotiations of forests and grasslands at edges you and I rarely visit. Knowing this can be like listening to a faraway bell tolling in the fog. You cannot touch the bell, but you recognize its role in the town's rhythm. In cities, the moon's tide can hide, masked by concrete and a grid of drains. But follow any river down to its mouth, and you will find the same old tide at work, nudging the water forward and back, stirring the brackish columns, playing with salinity lines that tiny fish and shrimp follow as if they were street signs. The moon's patience makes estuaries fertile. Up on the boardwalk, someone eats dinner without thinking of it. Down below, the water makes soft stripes of salt and fresh, and a school of juvenile fish finds the line that suits their gills. On a morning weeks later, a heron watches the shallows fill and empty, stepping forward and back in slow motion. All of this happens with such regularity that it barely registers as a power in the lives of those who depend on it, which is precisely how it becomes indispensable. There is a poetic way to think about this moon and earth partnership that remains scientific at heart. Gravity is a conversation, and the moon is one of our best listeners. It pays attention to the water and the rock and the air, and then it speaks in tides and in light, announcing and then withdrawing in a predictable cycle that lulls. The earth answers by rotating, by flexing, by giving and taking a little energy. They both stay within their roles. No grand reversals, no declarations, just the cycle and the trust it builds. Paths on the ocean that appear to be drawn by the wind alone are corrected by the tide and by the Coriolis effect. That gentle illusion you feel only when you watch the planets spin from a map maker's point of view. The moon's tides give currents something to push against. In narrow straits, The push becomes a river that runs in and out twice a day, carrying fragments of stories from one sea to another. Glacial silt meets warm eddies. Nutrients spilled by upwelling regions downstream are welcomed by different coastal shelves. The sea is a machine that runs on differences and gradients, and the moon is a small but reliable engine that keeps those differences from collapsing into sameness. When we build models of climate, we include these energies and motions, not because they bring excitement, but because they prevent boredom in the wrong places. Life is resilient when given recurring variation. Too much sameness is a kind of drought. You can imagine a seed that wants to be wetted and dried in sequence to know when to break its shell, or a diatom that flourishes when internal waves deliver a sip of nitrate at just the right interval. The moon is part of that metered care. To see how elegantly this care is arranged, consider corals on a reef. On specific nights, carefully timed by the moon and by water temperature, entire reefs release their gametes in plumes that look like inverted snowfalls. The sea becomes a cloud of potential, drifting like a dream through the arches of coral and over the heads of sleeping fish. Timing is essential. Success depends on it. The moon provides the simplest form of clock, and because everybody agrees on this clock, synchrony is nearly perfect. Imagine the quiet satisfaction in such a system. Imagine it going on as you fall asleep, whether you think of it or not. The moon's periodic absence behind clouds has also taught life its patience. A stormy week may hide it, and yet the tide goes on because the tide is gravity, not light. This disconnect between what you see and what pulls you is a lesson in humility and comfort. The universe keeps many promises out of sight. The gentle rhythm continues whether you are watching or yawning or already dreaming. The security of that constancy is one of the soft pillows the moon offers as you close your eyes. Venture further back in time in a calm way, and you find an earth newly formed, spinning faster, with days that were shorter, the moon closer, and the tide stronger, carving coastlines with a firmer hand. That closeness is a memory the planet carries in its rocks and in the fossils of creatures who laid down daily layers in their shells. Over time, the distance has grown, the tides have relaxed, and the system has become gentler. We live in a mature arrangement, measured and mild. The moon's retreat is a retreat into subtlety, into the kind of influence that carries weight precisely because it is so easy to overlook. Think also of winter nights when the moon is high and its light falls through bare branches, turning them into drawings on snow. The silence has a texture in such scenes, like the soft interior of a good coat. The cold makes sounds thin and crisp, and the moon makes edges gentle. In that hush, physics continues. The air shrinks a little with temperature. The ground holds its gathered chill. The ice on a pond contracts and sometimes sings a low note. The moon's tides in the crust make such songs stretch and compress in ways too small to isolate in a moment. But if you are the kind of person who likes to imagine instruments playing in the background of your life, you can include the moon string. It is tuned low, always. In the tropics, the moon plays with tides and storms, not as a conductor of tempests, but as a gentle partner in daily cycles that set the timing for sea breezes and land breezes. The presence of a tide that breathes is another layer in the melody of daytime heating and nighttime cooling. Most days, the sink is so soft you could be forgiven for never noticing, the way you do not listen for the motor of your refrigerator until it suddenly stops. If it stopped forever, you would adjust, but you would sense the changed room. Without the moon, the planet would be that room, very nearly the same, with a trace of difference large enough to transform comfort over time. Far from water, in deserts that look up at the sky with no trees to interrupt the view, the moon acts as a familiar. You can cross a dune field under a full moon without a lamp, the sand glowing like pale embers. The surface cools quickly after sunset, the day's heat radiating away into space, and the moon lightens what remains, not warming, only showing. Animals with quiet paws use that light to move. Their tracks the next morning tell you how they preferred the crest to the trough, how they paused near a shrub, how they set an even pace. No one asks them to supply an opinion on gravitational mechanics. They simply live inside the script the moon writes, and by living, help write it in turn. On mountain ranges, where the night sky feels closer, the moon draws frost into sparkling patterns on rock. The air smells pine bright and thin, and the quiet is so complete that a distant fox stepping on crusted snow sounds like a page being turned. The moon does not judge, does not decide which valley gets more sleep. It is impartial, and that impartiality is somehow intimate. You can lean back against a boulder and watch it move through the sky at a pace you barely detect, and understand what patient means. The gentle rhythm continues. It is not a chant you need to repeat. The moon repeats it for you, across the world, without pause. In human rooms, the moon is sometimes only a glow on a curtain, a reminder that beyond the warm air and the books and the gently breathing body beside you, the sky is also making its rounds. People in apartments and cottages and farmhouses are connected by that one pale square. It speaks a common language. You can imagine a child in a high-rise watching it, and a fisherman in a small harbour watching it, and the same comfort reaching each of them, even if their thoughts are different. The moon does not mind being understood in many ways. It has patience for every interpretation. If you were to explain to a friend, in a whisper because the hour is late, why the moon matters this much, you could say something like this: the moon keeps time in the sea and in the crust. It steadies the lean of the planet, and therefore the seasons. It slows the spin of the earth enough to make days more temperate for winds and waves. It lends light without glare, so that night animals can move without fear of being blinded, and day animals can sleep without the heat of an errant sunbeam. It gives living systems a set of predictable changes to mount their calendars upon. Without it, the changes would continue but their harmony would be thinner, and their range either smaller in the short term or wider over the long haul, neither of which is a recipe for the easy confidence we have developed in our corners of the world. Back to the intro's thought, you might not last a day without the moon, not because you would suddenly be unable to breathe, but because so much of what makes our days feel like days, and our nights feel like nights, is held in place by the moon's unintrusive hand, the tides that bring oxygen to a marsh at just the right hour, and the darkness that is dark enough but not empty, the wind patterns that have grown wise under a certain length of day, the axis that leans just so and not wildly further. All of this is the quiet architecture of habit. Without it, our comforts and routines would begin to drift, not as a jump scare, but as a persistent rearranging. The mind that loves a lullaby would miss the expected rhythm. Swim out in your mind to a place where the shore is a line behind you and the horizon is all around. Close your eyes in that place and feel the rise and fall of the water. You do not need to count the seconds between caps of swell to know the tide is doing its work beneath the picture you can see. That work is like the background hum that disappears when you turn on music, like the fabric behind embroidery, like the canvas under paint. The moon provides that fabric, that canvas. It is the dependable medium in which the sea paints, in which the air writes, in which continents settle their edges. Knowing this does not inflate the moon to grandiosity. It simply offers thanks for the invisible preparation that lets the visible world be gentle. There are, of course, storms and catastrophes in the history of coasts, but those are exceptions that ride on top of the patient tide. The moon does not cause a storm to be born or intensified out of proportion compared to the larger forces at play. Instead, it carries the water higher or lower by increments that matter to someone placing a sandbag, and it does so by a schedule that can be read, comforting in its clarity. Even when the sea is angriest, the moon's influence is steady, a reminder that the cycle continues beyond the storm's tantrum. In this way, it is a provider of perspective as much as of power. Extend your thoughts to ice again, not as a threat or a fright, but as a field of soft blues and pale greys under long light. The moon's tug on the ocean helps determine how much heat moves poleward by currents, where sea ice forms, how it drifts, and how it melts. That, combined with the steadiness it grants the axis, creates a winter pair of cradles at the poles, predictable enough that life there has learned to thrive in the hush, in the long cycle between sun and shadow. Arctic foxes change coats on cue. Penguins choose their rookeries by maps handed down through behaviour. The moon is in those maps, even if no one writes its name. You can also picture the Earth seen from far away, the moon a white bead against the velvet. The two are in conversation, and the conversation remains soft at all ranges. When sunlight catches both just right, you get the show of an eclipse, which becomes cultural history as much as physical demonstration. But most nights, the show is just the bead and the blue. You live inside that show, and you carry in your nerves the memory of a species that has always known the bead was friendly. Sleep is easier in a friendly universe. On that far stage, the moon and earth have rehearsed for a very long time. The stagehands are gravity and time, and the props are oceans and air. The play is simple. The moon passes overhead and underfoot. The sea lifts and bows. The crust flexes and rests. The axis leans and leans back, never too far, never too fast. The day lengthens a little and the moon steps back a little, partners giving each other room. It is a drama, only in the sense that music is drama when it swells and quiets. For sleep, you can focus on the quiet parts and let the rest slide by like a boat on a slow tide. Think, just for a moment, of all the species whose calendar follows the moon so precisely that their survival is written in its notebook. Grunions surf up on sandy beaches on certain nights to release eggs in wet sand and rely on the next tides to set them free. Corals release, as mentioned, in great coordinated events. Some reef fish choose their spawning nights by the moon's fullness, trusting that their eggs will ride the right currents. The moon's service is to be reliable. Everything else is a matter of physics doing favors for biology. You can rest in the knowledge that reliability is a kindness in the natural world, as it is in your own routines. On a personal level, the moon shows up in calendars that live on walls with thumbtacks or magnets, circles printed for when to plant or when to harvest mushrooms in certain forests. People who follow those calendars do not think the moon makes plants grow. They think the moon helps them plan, because it keeps the night hand steady on the clock. A stable clock lets you make a cup of tea at the same time each evening. It lets you meet someone at a bench at the same time each week. It lets you promise yourself that you can go to bed now and the world will still be here in the morning in the same shape. That is why a lullaby about tides and axes can put you to sleep. It is not escapism. It is a reminder that there is a trustworthy backbone under your day. Now, if we softly step back into the picture of the earth without the moon, we can see the quiet adjustments that would come with time. Tides reduced, nights a little darker in empty places, the axis drifting more widely, asking climate to explore a broader set of moods over geological history, the length of day easing along a different slope, reshaping the relationship between winds and waves, and the growth rhythms of plants. None of this changes the basics of breathing in and breathing out on a Tuesday night. But the accumulation of such changes would make many Tuesdays later feel different, and the comfort that comes from confidence in routine would be thinner. The phrase, "you would not last a day," is not an instruction to fear. It is an invitation to notice what we last inside of. The moon is a shelter, not because we would fall apart immediately without it, but because our shelter has been built in its presence. In the rooms of science, people have measured the speed at which the moon moves away, the torque of tides, the frequencies of internal waves, the timing of coral spawns, the flows of estuaries, the lengthening of the day. The numbers hang like quiet mobiles from the ceiling of those rooms. If you were to stand beneath one, it would turn, and the labels would pass your eyes slowly. Someone checks them off and nods. The room smells like coffee and old paper. The moon does not enter. It only sends a message by the sea and by the instruments stuck in the ground. Data accumulates softly. They wait for someone to say thank you. As the story closes in on your present breath, feel again the shore. The tide is turning, which is a joy to say because it implies that cycles go on. The sound of wavelets on stones is a string of little chimes. The wind lifts small hairs on your arm, then reddens the skin a little, then goes elsewhere. The moon passes through a thin cloud and emerges unchanged. In the dim, you can make out the gentle lean of the earth, because the stars wheel with a steadiness you now know is guided and partly calmed by the moon. It is a fine thing to be on a planet with such a companion, a world where a second body in the sky keeps our spins and our seasons within human comprehension. Your bed, where you lie now, has everything it needs. The room has played its part in quieting for the night. The city, or the countryside outside your window, coasts under a force that is neither demanding nor capricious. If you live near the sea, that sea is obeying its familiar orders. If you live far inland, the crust under your home works through its tiny cycles all the same. Your breath is a tide in miniature, and the master tide beyond your door agrees with it. They enlarge each other without noise. We return to the phrase in our title, to the idea that you would not last a day without the moon. Let it be a gentle exaggeration that leads you to a true place. You last your days well, because 1,000 quiet supports hold you up. The moon is one of those supports, constant, humble, graceful. Its gravity is the steady hand on Earth's shoulder. It persuades the waters to wander and return. It leans with the axis in a way that shortens its worries. You are allowed to thank it by sleeping. Let the closing of your eyes be like the turning of the tide, slowly, inevitably, satisfying. Let your thoughts drift out like the foam's lace, and then back in like the water smoothing the sand. Imagine yourself falling asleep on a small boat in a safe harbour, ropes humming so lightly that you can only hear them when your heart is empty of other sounds. The moon paints a path across the water to your pillow. It is an invitation, gentle and personal, to rest without needing to understand everything. You are understood by the world as it is. Thank you for joining this quiet voyage. If you found comfort here, a small tap on subscribe and a like help us keep releasing calm episodes like this. And there is always a playlist waiting in the description to carry you further, even after you drift away. You are safe, you are warm enough, and the rhythm that holds the seas holds you too. Close your eyes. The gentle rhythm continues. Good night.